Good morning. I'm really delighted to be here. Preparing for this talk, I learned a new acronym, which I didn't know before, AFN. My part of the program, we're looking at how to help people with developmental disabilities. So let's talk first about what a developmental disability is. It's a severe chronic disability attributable to mental and or physical impairment, and it manifests itself before the age of 18 and impacts at least 3 of these life functioning areas that you can see are capacity for independent living, economic self-sufficiency, mobility, language, etc. The developmental disabilities are defined by federal and state statutes, and so what we will be reviewing today are intellectual disability, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, and autism. All right, so let's look first at the needs of people with intellectual disabilities. When I first came into this field, we called this disorder mental deficiency. And I'm old enough to have known moron jokes in high school, and that was a long time ago. You all know we progressed to other, dumb blondes and et cetera. But at some point, the term mental deficiency became so pejorative that we changed the name to mental retardation. And about 10 years ago, this too was, we all have heard somebody refer to another individual as a retard. The term was changed to intellectual disability, but what that means is mental retardation. And mental retardation is defined in 2 ways. A score on an IQ test, which is below 70. Average scores, you all know, are 90 to 110, and significant limitations in adaptive functioning, and again, that this disorder manifests itself before the age of 18. There are many causes of developmental disabilities. Mom having a virus during pregnancy, such as rubella. That's why we're concerned about the decisions of many families to stop immunizing their children because of concerns that it may cause autism. There are genetic factors, so you can inherit recessive genes from each of your parents that then express in your genetic blueprint and cause intellectual disability, or you can have a spontaneous mutation, or in the formation of the ovum, the division does not go correctly, you end up with an extra chromosome, and then you have Down syndrome. So what does it mean to have an intellectual disability? I think it's helpful to think about it in terms that development is slower than typical. So it takes longer perhaps to attain independence in walking. We all know most infants start walking at about 12 to 13 months, so that the expression of or the attainment of developmental milestones is slowed. Language is slower to develop, and there is an upper limit or capacity that the individual is able to attain because of these brain differences. And so what I've indicated are just IQ is most predictive to school achievement. So people with what we classify as a mild intellectual disability will at adulthood generally be functioning academically up to about the 6th grade level. And more often we see 3rd to 4th grade levels. So think about the skills that you were learning in 3rd to 4th grade. So it means you can do addition and subtraction, Maybe you can do some multiplication. We're very fortunate to live in this place and time because people can use calculators or they can use their debit cards and they don't have to learn money skills anymore. And if you look at your credit card the next time you take it out, if you put your thumb and your forefinger on the MasterCard or Visa icon, that puts that card into a specific position where you can pull it through the machine. And so that is how we're teaching money management, rather than learning what coin constitutes a penny or a quarter. Individuals with moderate intellectual disability generally achieve up to about the second grade level. And this is the case that's often seen in persons with Down syndrome. And then we have a group of more impaired individuals, and their functioning at adulthood may be at the 2 to 4 year level. And then we have some very involved adults who are functioning below the 2-year level. Some of the areas that are impacted are language expressions, so vocabulary for a person with an intellectual disability is not as varied or complex. Attention span is shorter, memory is shorter, so there's a test that psychologists use that's called digit span. So we tell people a sequence of numbers and then have them repeat back, and that's a measure of what we call short-term memory. Most of us in this room would be able to repeat back a span of a sequence of at least 7 digits. And that's interesting to me because that's what our telephone numbers were for a very long time before we added area codes. But individuals with a mild intellectual disability can repeat back on an average 5 digits. So there are those kinds of learning differences which really can't be trained. We can't train people out of them. So I want to talk just a bit about my agency. It's the San Diego Regional Center. We provide intake, assessment, and case management, and also funding for a variety of services for people with developmental disabilities. And like this Red Cross chapter, we provide services in both San Diego and Imperial counties, and that's a real challenge because we have a relatively resource-rich urban population in this county and a rural county where there are very few resources. And so we are stretched to and have the challenge of providing services, getting them going. Transportation is much more of an issue in Imperial than it is here. So we share some of those challenges. The Regional Center currently provides services for 20,100 consumers, and about 48% are children and 52% are adults. So what that says to me is that, you know, at least half of this 20,000 will be coming to shelters or will have the support of parents. And the group that I'm going to focus on for this talk are the adults and adults who are living in their own home or apartment. So you can see on this slide that about 75% of the people whom we serve, and they range in age from newborns to the elderly. So when you have a developmental disability, it is lifelong, and the Regional Center is here to support you through all of those developmental stages. 75% live with family members, 16% live in residential facilities, and 8% are about, it's now this year 1,600 individuals live in their own apartment or home, and those are the persons that I think we can be thoughtful about today, because they're they don't necessarily have a live-in care provider, and they're going to be the most vulnerable. All right, so what resources are available for these adults who are living in their own apartments? The Regional Center funds what we call independent living services. So these are staff which go to the consumer's home, averaging between 4 and 20 hours a month, to provide assistance with grocery shopping, housekeeping, making and keeping, medical appointments, those life activities that the rest of us struggle to keep control of too. Some people with intellectual disabilities are parents, and the independent living staff also helps with parenting skills and ensuring that the children are being well cared for. Many of our young adults are now attending community colleges. The community college system has a Disabled Students Association that provides assistance and support. We'll take notes in class for you, for example. People with intellectual disabilities may have a job coach, again, funded through either the Department of Rehabilitation or through the Regional Center that helps you find a job, drops in periodically on the job and helps your employer to understand your cognitive problems. Each individual will have a regional center service coordinator, and these are social workers, and we've been working hard in our system to make sure we have a backup of all of our records in case there's a disaster. If a consumer comes to a shelter or ends up in one of your services without records, you can always contact the regional center. And on an annual basis, we update what people's medications are, what their family supports are, and generally people with intellectual disabilities will know what the name of their regional center worker. More and more of these people have service animals, and so that's one of the, and not because they're visually impaired, but for emotional support. They have mobility equipment, and I'll talk about that more when we look at cerebral palsy, and they really are dependent on the kindness of neighbors and strangers. So what are some of the challenges that they face? They're poor. Very few consumers with intellectual disabilities have full-time jobs, and if they do, they're working minimum wage. And where do we see them? We see them in our grocery store checkout lines, bagging groceries, bussing tables at fast food restaurants, doing some housekeeping in the hotels in our area. But there are some creative contracts out there that have been developed. The Association for Retarded Citizens, for example, has a contract for food service for the military personnel on Camp Pendleton. And that is wonderful. It's a real job for these people with medical benefits, which we all know is a challenge. Most of these people with most of the people with intellectual disabilities do not drive. They either don't have the cognitive skills to be able to pass the test, and another problem is just simply the cost of an automobile. It's not within their budget. So they're dependent on public transportation. And I talked with several of our consumers about what happened to them when we had the power outage. And they stood at the bus stop for hours, waiting for a bus, which didn't come. So we need to think about that. When they got home, the next day when they had to throw out their food, they lived paycheck to paycheck, just like some of us. And they didn't have room in their budget to replace that food. So they are living just that close to the edge. They may have a coexisting mental disorder. About 30% of people with mild intellectual disability have have an identified mental disorder. And often it's anxiety or depression because they have hard lives. They have heroic lives. I hope that you can have an opportunity to interface at some point. These individuals have built their life on predictability and routine. So in interviewing a couple of my colleagues at work who have a developmental disability, you know, the sense was that when the power went out, they simply did not know what to do. They didn't have the cognitive resources to make decisions, but mostly what they did then was to call their independent living skills provider and get help. And these people who provide independent living skills support generally have a caseload of 4 to about 8. So they will be a tremendous resource for our consumers in the case of a disaster. Obviously, if you're not very bright, you're going to have limited problem solving and coping when you're stressed, more than the rest of us who have intellectual disabilities. And you'll have difficulty processing instructions which are shouted at you or are rapidly delivered. So let's talk about some tips for helping people with intellectual challenges. You want to speak to the person if they come with their independent living support. You still want to speak to the person instead of their help, their staff. And you want to use short phrases. Again, that's in simple vocabulary. Obviously, you're going to say, my name is Lynne Gregory, I'm here to help you. Help is a great word to use because our consumers have been helped every day of their lives and they understand that. You want to give the name of your job. I'm here because, you know, there's a fire. Show your picture identification badge. If you're in different clothes, because you have your emergency gear with you, you need to explain that that's why your photo looks different. And you want to always model a calm demeanor. So when I'm managing a consumer who's shouting at me, I really have my voice get much slower and lower, and it often can help in de-escalating the person's level of arousal. Obviously, there are communication challenges. You need to give extra time for the person to process what you're saying. When we see confusion on other people's faces, you know, we tend to accelerate our questions. Are you hurt? Is anybody here with you? And if you start this rapid fire kind of speech, it's going to be more difficult for the individual to process what you're saying. And again, you want to, I have to work hard at not getting my best, you know, kindergarten voice when I'm speaking with people who are speaking slowly or more simply. You want, again, that's a way, nonverbal way to communicate respect. And sometimes you can use pictures or objects to illustrate your words. So we'll see some materials in a minute that show you the use of pictures. All their lives, people with intellectual disabilities have heard the phrase, if you do your homework, first you do your homework, I should say. First you do your homework, then you can watch TV. It's called, in the psychological jargon, the PREMAC principle. And so using, again, short phrases, first we do this, then this will ensue, that will be a helpful speech form for people with intellectual disabilities. They may have a poor sense of time, so if you can tie events to daily activities such as we'll do this by lunch, we'll do this by nighttime, that's rather than at 12 o'clock we're going to do such and such, that will be a helpful strategy. And then you want to try to obviously provide reassurance, if you know how long the situation will last, when they can contact their family and friends. Remembering their birth date may be difficult, so most people will know their age. Sometimes it's hard to understand the speech because of dysarthria. The speech is not necessarily intelligible, so some people can, ask them to write their name. And obviously you're looking for an identification bracelet, and you're looking for any essential equipment such as wheelchairs, communication devices, medication. Remember, 30% have a mental disorder, so they're going to have medication. About 14% also have epilepsy, so they're going to have medication, and you want to ask about that. Okay. Again, a reassuring demeanor, using simple phrases of "it's okay." For individuals with autism, we write social stories and we intersperse "it's okay," and that becomes a catchphrase for people to feel safe. You want to highlight the appropriate actions. You're helping by moving fast. And again, repeat over and over again, first we do this, then this is what happens next. You want to try to simplify the environment, so if you've got something written, it needs to be at the 4th or 5th grade level. And it needs to be brief, and you can reduce distractions environmentally. Okay, I think we're ready for the video. What I have here is a video that was developed by the Department of Developmental Services, actually after our first fire and some of the earthquakes in other parts of the state. And it's an instructional video for how to prepare for a disaster. The narrator is a person with an intellectual disability. The content will be familiar to all of you. What I wanted you to have a chance to see and get a feel for is just the demeanor and the type of language that this individual uses to instruct his peers about how to plan for a disaster. Okay.
Feeling safe, being safe. Hi, my name is Sam Durbin. I am the narrator of this DVD. I am a member of the DDS Consumer Advisory Committee. I hope you enjoy our presentation. Ways to have the life you want. My life, my way. Feeling safe, being safe. This is a story of how I used think, plan, do to create a plan to be safe and feel safe. I began the think, plan, do process by thinking about why it is important for me to feel safe at home. It's important for people to be prepared because if there's a major disaster, they need to take care of themselves until somebody can come. They need to not be in a position where they don't have any food or, like the gas pipes are busted and they don't have a flashlight or a radio to find out where they can go because of a flood or any kind of a disaster. They need to be prepared at all times. And that doesn't mean just people with disabilities. I think it means for everybody. Feeling safe means being safe. You have to feel safe deep down inside. Being safe means I know how to take care of myself and not be afraid. If I create a plan to help me feel safe, I will be prepared and not have to worry. I will be calm and be able to follow the steps to take care of myself in an emergency. I began thinking about what I need to do to take care of myself. I thought about the different things people need to know about me: my health, my medication, my glasses for reading, and my dog. I also want people to know how to talk to me when there is an emergency. I want them to explain what is happening in a quiet, gentle voice. Other people may want someone to speak slow and clear. I also need help making my own plan to help me feel safe. With my goal set, I began to create a plan to look at ways to be safe at home using my community resources, my neighbors, and developing my own personal safety plan. I began by filling out my Feeling Safe, Being Safe worksheet. I learned that I needed an emergency kit to put my important items in. I also discovered that there are very important items I need just in case I have to leave my home. I would put these items in my kit. I also need to know who to call in case of an emergency and ask where to go if I had to leave my home. I need to get to know my neighbors so I can call them if there's an emergency and I need their help. I also have a friend at work that I can call in an emergency. By creating my plan, I know that I will be able to practice and be prepared for an emergency. I would also be able to tell other people how to help me. I took action by creating my plan. I made a list of things I need to put in my kit, a list of all my medical conditions, medications, insurance, and some money. I put them in a plastic bag so they don't get wet. Other things to include in my kit are food, water, eyeglasses, flashlight, whistle, radio, and emergency supplies. I put all of my emergency items in the kit and placed it by the door so that it will be easy for me to take if I have to leave my home. I asked my neighbor to exchange phone numbers so we can help each other in an emergency. I made sure I knew how to call 911 and asked the person what I needed to do or where I needed to go if I could not stay in my home. I also would turn on my radio or TV to find out what I needed to do. I asked my friend to help me fill out my magnet and put it on my refrigerator for everyone to see. I want people to know how to help me. If you feel safe, that means you're prepared. You can't feel safe without being safe. And there's just no way. Think. Remember. Think about what is important to you in an emergency and how people can help you. Plan. Remember. Making a plan helps you create the steps for what you want. Do. Remember. Taking action is the way to get what you want and ask for help if you need it. Lots of people use think, plan, do.
So you get a sense of the simplicity of the language, the slow, deliberate speech, and the repetition that are helpful supports for people with intellectual disabilities. Okay, so let me tell you a story about Katrina. My brother lives in New Orleans, so he experienced that disaster firsthand. And we did in California as well. We had the experience about a month after the hurricane of a group of people who came through intake at the regional center. And this group, the woman was a care provider in a group home in the New Orleans area, and she had 6 women in their 30s and 40s whom she was providing care for. And anticipating the hurricane, she decided not to stay in her home, but to take her residents to a motel, which she did. She took the medications, she took the basic paperwork, and they spent the night of the hurricane in the hotel. And the next day, as the 17th Street Canal had collapsed, the motel parking lot was flooded. She lost her car. The water went up to the 2nd story of the motel, and they were stranded there. Eventually, they were rescued by helicopter. The helicopter could not take all 7 of them at the same time, so they got separated. When she got to Houston, she went through all of the shelters and found 5 of her 6 residents. And then she had an opportunity to get on, somebody chartered a plane, and whoever wanted to come to California could. So she got on the plane with her 5 young women and ended up then in San Diego trying to establish a group home and residence here. And we had the challenge in the agency because, of course, we have procedures and we have to determine, do these people is their primary disability intellectual disability? Because several of them clearly had thought disorder and a mental disorder, which would not make them eligible for our agency. So it's that bureaucratic stuff that we deal with. And there were no records. Again, we have the responsibility of trying to determine, is this a developmental disability? And that means figuring out, did it occur prior to the age of 18? And so we looked the women were very frightened of being separated from the caregiver, and so we did essentially a group intake. They all sat in the same room, listened to one another's story. We tried to get history from them. The history was very sketchy. And ultimately, we were in the position where we found 4 of them eligible because it did appear that they had developmental disability, but one was clearly primary. She had graduated from high school, and I think even had some college, and her issue at this point was the thought disorder, which means she has to be, managed by another agency. So there's a situation of how things, the care provider thought that she had everything put together to be safe. Eventually, licensing regulations in California are different than in Louisiana. And I know that she decided to go back to Louisiana and try to pull her life together there. All right, let me see. Let me check our time here. Okay, so we're going to move on to look now at people with autism. And this is this fascinating disorder. We have a mantra that we say in the field: when you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism, because there's such a variety of presenting issues. But generally, autism is a disorder which is characterized by difficulties in these three areas: social interaction, communication, and then there are stereotyped behaviors and sensory features. And let's look briefly at social interaction, because all of you have a picture in your mind of a classic autistic child who is nonverbal, never looks at you, and is rocking, flipping a string, and that would be what we would call an aloof individual. But there are also, we now have the idea of this disorder being a spectrum, and so there are milder expressions of the symptoms, or the features, I should say. And so we may have individuals who are what we would call passive. So they don't initiate social interaction, but they can respond if an adult, a teacher, or caregiver starts the interaction. And then we have this group, this very interesting group of people who would be called interactive but odd. And these are generally higher functioning cognitively. So in this group, we find that some have intellectual disability and some do not. So let me give you an example of an interactive but odd child. Is the 6-year-old who presented in our waiting area, just eager to talk to anyone he could about the Titanic. And he had memorized the passenger list and was very eager to share this information with anyone in the waiting area who would listen to him. So interactive but odd. In terms of communication, we do see those classically autistic children who remain nonverbal despite our best efforts at providing speech therapy. We're looking very excitedly at the iPad, because what we found is that many nonverbal individuals they have great visual memory, and they can spell and type complete sentences. So we're looking at applications for the iPad, and Silicon Valley is helping us because the staff in those places have children with autism. So we are expanding the ability to use a very affordable device for augmentative communication. And then there are sensory features and behaviors that are part of this disorder as well. And I talk to families about the sensory volume knob. So for some of the individuals, the volume knob is turned all the way up. So they're hearing the airplane, the helicopter, or the trash truck before we do. In other cases, the volume knob is turned all the way down. So a very interesting finding, which really happened because there are chat rooms for autistic adults, high-functioning adults. So just think a minute about how do we know when we need to go to the toilet? We have bowel and bladder pressure cues. We feel those. Our brain tells us what those are. We feel a sensation. Our brain tells us what what that sensation is about, and then has a plan and puts it in action for us to get around the side of the building to the restroom. Some people with high-functioning autism tell us that they do not feel those bowel and bladder pressure cues. And so they have themselves on a habit schedule, and that's the way they avoid accidents. Well, just think about living life that way. We've had children who have, one of the children whom we follow burned himself when the family got one of those stoves that doesn't, it has the smooth surface, doesn't have the burners. But he didn't communicate pain, and it was not until the next day when they looked at his hands that were covered in blisters that that they learned that he had been burned. So there's the sensory volume knob all the way down. So those are some of the challenges that these children and adults have. And then we see the other types of repetitive behaviors, rocking, twirling the string. One child came in with a straw that he would bend in precisely the middle and flip and watch, and generally do it out of the side of his eyes. So those are some of the unusual behaviors. And we used to think, we used to work really hard in the behavioral field at suppressing those and getting rid of them. And now we understand that they really serve a comfort function for the individual. So when, you know, if you're seeing some of these odd things, if it's not hurting or interfering, you know, with the evacuation process, permit them to occur. It's comforting and a way of de-escalating one's level of arousal. Okay. So let's talk about communication. Again, you want to speak calmly, use concrete phrases with no more than 1 or 2 steps. Sometimes it's helpful to write brief instructions, again, because processing language is so hard for persons with autism. I've heard Temple Grandin, you know, she's our most famous autistic person. There was a bio of her on HBO a few months ago. She has a PhD in animal management and designs designs systems for getting cows in from feedlots to the slaughterhouse and packing shed. So she has this brilliant mind, but she says that she cannot take a phone call in an airport because she cannot separate the voice that's on the phone from all of the background noise. So that's a processing problem that has to do with auditory input and understanding language. So actually, in contrast, the visual reasoning is remarkable for many of these people with autism. So if you can give visual instruction, that's helpful. An example, I was evaluating a child, and at some point in interviewing the family, and at some point he clearly needed to go to the bathroom. If you're a psychologist in the field of developmental disabilities, you spend a lot of time in bathrooms. He's holding himself. We offered him to get to the restroom. He could not make the transition from the room. He became very agitated about having to make a transition from a room to the restroom. So what I finally did was draw a picture of a toilet, tell him that this was his ticket. He could go to the restroom and he could decide. There were four stalls, and he could decide which stall he was going to use. And just with that visual, it got him a little unstuck from the frantic feelings. So think about using visuals and visuals that you create on the spot. There is one of the features of autism may be what we call echolalia, that the person repeats what you say over and over again. We used to think of that as a problem and try to suppress it. Now we understand that part of saying it aloud over and over gives a chance to process. We also now understand that avoiding eye contact, which we used to think was because the person was not interested in people or faces, avoiding eye contact is done because our faces apparently are so distracting because our mouths are moving, Our eyes are shifting, that some people with autism say they can't process what they hear if they're looking at a face. It's too much information. But they can then learn to, I need to think about that for a minute. Use that as a strategy. Let me think about that for a minute. Look away. Meanwhile, they're rehearsing, they're using their echolalia to rehearse what was said, and that helps them with processing the communication. The person may talk about topics unrelated to the situation. So one of my best stories about an example of this is a young adult with autism. Most of these are males. There are 3 to 4 males to every female with this diagnosis. Was driving, and his obsession happened to be his special interest happened to be about raptors. So he loved birds of prey, and he saw a bird of prey, as we all do as we're driving down the freeway, that was an unusual one, and he started driving erratically. He was pulled over by the police officer and was so excited to talk about this bird of, this particular bird of prey that the officer arrested him as as having disordered thinking. Again, what he was not able to do was to shift from this obsession to, when the cop pulls you over, you sort of need to pay attention to that agenda, not to birds of prey. Okay. You want to avoid phrases that have a meaning beyond the concrete words. These people think very literally. So if you're saying knock it off or cut it out, they're thinking cut it out. Cut what part of my body? Again, you're approaching the individuals in a calm manner. The person may not give you eye contact. Remember, I said that's because they're processing what you say. Permit this if it doesn't interfere. It's not that they're not listening. The person may look at you from an odd angle, may laugh or giggle inappropriately. Again, this is not disrespect. This is the confusion that these people have around social interactions and the expectations. Here's a person who's got his hands over his ears because, again, in this situation, his sensory volume knob is turned all the way up. So certainly, if it's possible, want to lower the noise because individuals can become very agitated. They're hearing the sounds more loudly than we do. So you want to try to find a quiet location. Touch may be painful to these folks. Again, that's the sensory volume knob turned all the way up. So that when we're patting a person or putting our arm around the person and to comfort, that may not be perceived as a comforting gesture. And again, this fixation on a topic or object is often used to reduce stress. So I'm confused about about the social, what's going on socially. If I can just focus on, birds of prey, I'm safe. Often they'll carry objects, which again are used for comfort. If it's not causing a problem, permit it to happen. Make sure the person is away from potential hazards or dangers. I talked about, the child who burned himself and did not feel pain. Many people with autism just simply do not get it, that busy streets are dangerous, or high places are dangerous. These are the kids where the presenting problem for the psychologist will be they slip out of the house and are found without their clothes in their neighbor's swimming pool. So you want to check for injuries because the person may not be able to tell you if they're hurt. They don't feel the sensation. And this pacing, jumping, and rocking are self-calming techniques, and again, if it's not interfering with whatever you need the person to do, to permit it is probably the best course. All right, how's our time here? All right. So I want to look now at people with cerebral palsy, and these are individuals who secondary to a brain injury or atypical brain development, have difficulty with motor functions. So they may have very spastic movements, so their muscle tone is atypical, so it's hard to reach. They get locked in certain positions. That may cause them to have difficulties in feeding themselves. The motor planning that's required for that are ambulating. All right. Again, many of these people are in wheelchairs, and they're in motorized wheelchairs and these chairs are an extension of their bodies, and you shouldn't touch the wheelchair unless you have permission to do so. And if you need to, help move the person, then you want to ask before you move the wheelchair. And often, they've been trained in how to transfer. They know their chairs well. If they have the cognitive skills, and they can assist you in the best way to help. So what are the resources these people have? They have individualized wheelchairs, often because of the spastic muscle tone. The individual may develop scoliosis, curvature of the spine. The chairs are often highly individualized with seat inserts to help position them. Sometimes they're angled back because people with CP can be more relaxed if they're in a slight incline. Many people with CP, despite their motor issues, do not have intellectual disability, and so they have adaptive vans that they drive. They have if they have problems pressing, getting a key into a lock, they may have door openers, there are lifts. I mean, fortunately here in Southern California, we're pretty accessible in terms of bathrooms, buildings, and sidewalks. My daughter went to school in Boston, and I was just amazed in that city, and going to restaurants and various public places. They've got older buildings than we do, and they are not accessible. Okay. Again, you want to ask, the main message here is ask the person how to help. I know our time is short, so I'm going to rush through these a little bit. In rescues or transports, the person may be transferred from the wheelchair. These motorized wheelchairs are big and they're heavy, so they may weigh as much as 100 pounds. And so there are these evacuation chairs. My daughter works on the 57th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, and when I visited her office, I noticed that there were evacuation chairs on every floor. And that happened after the first World Trade Center bombing. One of the stories that was told was that of a man who was on the 66th floor in the World Trade Center. He was quadriplegic due to a spinal cord injury, and it took 6 hours to get him out of the building during the first bombing. And that was to get him from the 66th floor to something like the 47th floor, where he could then be put on a stretcher and taken out. The Port Authority got these lightweight evacuation chairs which go downstairs easily. And in the second bombing, he got out in an hour and a half, and he got out 10 minutes before the tower fell. So on reading that story, it made me think about our agency, and we've got 3 floors, and I'm going to ask my administration if we could get one of these evacuation chairs. But if possible, evacuating the person in their own mobility equipment, because these devices are really important to people. I'm going to ask Kurt to send out my email, and I can email you this PowerPoint if you'd like. So so you can get these tips written down. You want to also bring the charging apparatus for the wheelchair. All right, briefly, I'm going to go through people with epilepsy. So the way our brains operate is there's an excitation function and there's an inhibitory function, and what happens when a person has a seizure is that the excitation function is just on override, and the neurons in the brain fire in massive synchronized bursts. So I'm assuming most of you all, know about managing a seizure. Again, I'm just going to quickly go through. We've all seen grand mal seizures, and then there can sometimes be a blank stare, fluttering eyes, which is the absence seizure. During the seizure, you're obviously being calm and reassuring. You want to get the person onto the floor, lie down, something under their head, possibly on their side, if you can manage. The major source of injuries in a seizure is the person hitting a piece of furniture as they're falling to the floor. So you want to remove objects so that people can be safe. You don't restrain the person. You won't be able to do it anyway. It's not helpful, and certainly you don't want to put anything into their mouths. This is, that happens in the cowboy movies, but don't put anything in their mouth. And always you want to time the seizure, because it should be over in several minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. If it goes on beyond 5 minutes, that's a medical emergency. So here are some tips for when you need to call 911. If it's the first seizure, if the person's pregnant, if they're having trouble breathing, and if the seizure lasts longer than 5 minutes. Implications for life functioning of this disorder: it can co-occur with intellectual disability. These people may have sleep disorders, so that there may be increased seizures associated with lack of sleep. So if we have a disaster where everybody has been awake for a long time, seizures may occur more frequently. And of course, driving is restricted for people with epilepsy that's not fully controlled, and so that is a huge impact on the quality of people's lives. All right. I'm only 2 minutes over time. So thank you for the opportunity. I know it's time for us to take a break, right, Kurt? I'm here to answer any questions individually. I hope that you can meet some of these very interesting people whom we serve. They do have heroic lives, and they need our support during a disaster. So, thank you.